Most people believe the Breakers was built to celebrate wealth, power, and the triumph of a dynasty at the height of the Gilded Age. But this palace of marble and gold was born in mourning. It rose after a husband died, after a marriage collapsed, and after a woman was left with money but no shelter from grief. Its walls were raised not to host joy, but to silence memory, to overwhelm sorrow with scale, and to prove survival through spectacle. This is the story of how heartbreak became architecture, and what that decision cost everyone who lived inside it. Alva Erskine Smith was born in 1853 to a family that knew what it meant to fall. Her father had been wealthy once, a cotton broker in Mobile, Alabama, before the Civil War erased fortunes overnight and redrew the map of American power. The Smiths fled to New York with their status in tatters, their money gone, and only one currency left: ambition. Alva grew up watching her mother perform the careful choreography of diminished gentility. She learned early that in America's new industrial age, bloodlines meant nothing without gold to back them. The old families looked down on the new millionaires. The new millionaires bought their way into palaces the old families could no longer afford. And women like Alva, caught between worlds, understood that marriage was the only ladder available. She was 22 when she met William Kissam Vanderbilt. He was the grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, the man who had turned steamships and railroads into the largest fortune America had ever seen. William had inherited millions without having to build a single thing. Alva saw opportunity. William saw a woman who sparkled in ballrooms and knew how to hold a room's attention. They married in 1875. The marriage was strategic, not tender. William gave Alva access to bottomless wealth. Alva gave William a wife who could weaponize that wealth in ways he never imagined. She understood what he did not, that money alone would not open the doors of old New York society. Those doors required spectacle, precision, and the willingness to humiliate anyone who stood in the way. In 1883, Alva threw a costume ball at their new mansion on Fifth Avenue. She invited 1,200 guests. She spent more than $275,000 on a single night. And she deliberately excluded Caroline Astor, the woman who decided who mattered in New York, until Astor begged for an invitation to avoid public embarrassment. Alva had won, but winning in ballrooms did not mean winning at home. William was often absent, emotionally distant, more interested in yachts and leisure than in the marriage itself. Alva had 3 children, Consuelo, William Jr., and Harold. She raised them with the same calculated intensity she had used to storm New York society. Affection was secondary. Excellence was mandatory. By the early 1890s, the marriage had become a performance neither of them believed in anymore. They divorced in 1895, scandalous and public, a rupture that sent shockwaves through a society that preferred to pretend such failures did not exist among the refined. Alva kept her money. She kept her social position, but she had lost the narrative. Divorce marked her as damaged, ambitious, unfeminine. She needed to rebuild her image, to assert control, to prove that she was not a woman to be pitied or dismissed. And then, in 1899, an opportunity arrived wrapped in tragedy. Cornelius Vanderbilt II, William's older brother, died suddenly of a stroke. He was only 55. He had been the head of the family, the responsible one, the man who carried the weight of the Vanderbilt name without complaint. His death left a widow, Alice, and a legacy that needed a monument. But it also left a void in the family hierarchy. and Alva, no longer tied to William, but still bearing the Vanderbilt name through her children, saw a chance to step into that void in her own way. She turned her attention to Newport, Rhode Island. Newport was where America's wealthiest families fled each summer to escape the heat and filth of the city. It was a stage, a proving ground, a place where fortunes were displayed and legacies were measured in acreage and ballroom capacity. The Vanderbilts already had a presence there, a house called the Breakers, but it had burned to the ground in 1892. Alice Vanderbilt, Cornelius's widow, decided to rebuild. But this would not be a house. It would be a declaration. 70 rooms, Italian Renaissance design, marble imported from Africa and Italy. A structure so vast it would overshadow every other estate in Newport, so permanent it would survive generations, so overwhelming it would silence every whisper about grief, loss, or the fragility of dynasties built on steam and iron. Alice hired Richard Morris Hunt, the most celebrated architect in America, a man who had trained in Paris and designed palaces for families who wanted to be remembered as American royalty. Hunt understood the assignment. This was not about comfort. It was about immortality. Construction began in 1893, just 1 year after the fire. The timeline was impossible. 2 years to complete a structure of this scale. But Alice demanded it. She wanted the house finished, open, operational. She wanted to walk through completed rooms while she still had the strength to claim them. And so, the work began. Hundreds of laborers working through winters and summers, through exhaustion and injury, raised walls of limestone and filled rooms with gold leaf and frescoes painted by European masters who had never set foot in America before. The breakers rose not from celebration, but from the ashes of what had been lost. It rose because a widow refused to let death have the final word. It rose because grief, when given enough money and enough will, can be transformed into something that looks like triumph. But transformation comes at a cost, and that cost would be paid by everyone who lived inside. From the water, the breakers looked like a fortress made of light. 70 rooms spread across 125,000 square feet. Limestone facades that glowed gold in the summer sun. A footprint so vast that walking from the front entrance to the oceanfront loggia required crossing what felt like a city block under a single roof. But a palace is not a home. It is a machine. And every machine requires fuel, maintenance, and the invisible labor of people whose names are never recorded in the archives. The breakers demanded a household staff of more than 70 people just to keep it operational during the summer season. 70 people to clean, cook, serve, repair, and maintain a residence that the Vanderbilt family occupied for only 7 weeks each year. 7 weeks. The rest of the year, the house sat empty, wrapped in dust cloths, its chandeliers covered, its rooms silent except for the skeleton crew who kept the boilers running and the pipes from freezing. But those 7 weeks required a choreography so precise, so exhausting, that servants worked 16-hour days just to make the family's existence appear effortless. Maids rose at 5 in the morning to light fires in 33 fireplaces before the family woke. Footmen polished silver for hours so that every surface gleamed under candlelight. The head chef commanded a kitchen staff of 12, preparing multi-course meals that could include dishes the family barely touched, excess that was discarded before it ever reached the dining room. There were servants who existed only to serve other servants. There were hallways the family never entered, staircases they never climbed. The service wing was a hidden city beneath the visible one, connected by tunnels and back staircases that allowed workers to move invisibly, appearing only when summoned, vanishing the moment they were no longer needed. Alice Vanderbilt ruled this machine with precision. Meals were announced by bells. Guests moved through the house according to invisible schedules. Conversations happened in designated rooms at designated times. Spontaneity was not welcome. Chaos was not tolerated, but precision cannot prevent loneliness. Alice's children grew up surrounded by people and utterly isolated. Governesses raised them. Tutors educated them. Servants dressed them. Their mother appeared at scheduled intervals, inspected their progress, and retreated to her own private quarters, where even her children required permission to enter. The Breakers was designed to project permanence, but its interior life was fractured, compartmentalized, ruled by silence and distance. Rooms were connected by doors that remained locked. Conversations were limited to topics that would not disturb the carefully maintained surface. And beneath that surface, the cost kept climbing. Operating the Breakers for a single summer season required a budget that exceeded the lifetime earnings of most American workers. Coal arrived by the ton to heat water for the elaborate plumbing system Hunt had installed, a network of pipes that delivered hot and cold running water to more than 20 bathrooms, a luxury almost unheard of at the time. Electricity, still a novelty in the 1890s, powered lights throughout the house, but the system required constant maintenance, constant monitoring, constant expense. Gas lamps served as backup. Candles were still used in some rooms for ambiance, their wax imported, their light carefully managed to create the illusion of effortless elegance. The illusion was expensive, the illusion was fragile, and the illusion required the labor of people who would never be photographed in the grand hall, never mentioned in the society pages, never remembered as part of the story. The marble told a different kind of story. Hunt had imported rare materials from quarries across Europe and Africa, marble columns from Italy, alabaster from Algeria, mosaics assembled by craftsmen who spent months on their knees, placing tiny pieces of stone into patterns that would outlast everyone who ever walked across them. The music room alone cost more to complete than most Americans would earn in 10 lifetimes. Its walls were covered in gilded wood panels carved in France, shipped across the Atlantic in pieces, and reassembled on site by artisans who worked with the kind of reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. Because that is what the Breakers was, a secular cathedral, built to worship not God, but the idea that wealth could transcend death, that beauty could outlast grief, that permanence could be purchased if you were willing to pay enough. But cathedrals are cold, and permanence is not the same as peace. Alice walked through rooms designed to impress strangers and felt the weight of absence. Her husband was gone. Her children were growing, distant, shaped more by servants and social expectations than by anything resembling intimacy. The house she had built to prove survival had become a monument to everything she had lost along the way. The oceanfront loggia became her refuge. Open to the air, overlooking the Atlantic, it was the one place in the house that felt less like a museum and more like a place where a person could breathe. She sat there in the evenings, watching the waves, surrounded by stone columns and marble floors that cost a fortune to install and would cost another fortune to maintain. The Breakers demanded everything. It demanded money, labor, attention, sacrifice. It demanded that life be scheduled, that emotions be controlled, that the messy, unpredictable parts of being human be hidden behind closed doors and perfect surfaces. And for a while, that was enough. For a while, the grandeur distracted from the emptiness. For a while, the machine kept running. The servants kept working. The rooms kept gleaming under chandeliers that reflected light but revealed nothing. But machines break down. Systems collapse. And even the most carefully controlled environments cannot hold back the forces gathering outside the gates. The crisis did not arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly, disguised as inevitability, as the natural progression of time and change and forces too large for any single family to control. By the early 1900s, America was waking up to the cost of the Gilded Age. Journalists were writing exposés about the gap between industrial wealth and industrial labor. Reformers were organizing, demanding safety regulations, fair wages, limits on the power of monopolies. Theodore Roosevelt was breaking up trusts and publicly criticizing the men who had built fortunes on the backs of workers who died in factories and rail yards. The Vanderbilt fortune, built on railroads and shipping, was increasingly under scrutiny. The public was asking questions. How much was too much? How many mansions did one family need? How many servants? How many summer homes? How many imported marble columns could be justified while families in tenements struggled to afford bread? The breakers, once a symbol of triumph, was becoming a symbol of excess. And Alice could feel the shift, the slow erosion of the world that had once celebrated people like her without question. But the external pressure was manageable compared to the fracture happening inside the family. Alice's daughter, Gertrude Vanderbilt, had married well and was beginning to carve out a life of her own, using the family money to fund artists and build museums. But her son, Cornelius III, was struggling under the weight of expectations he had never asked to carry. He was supposed to be the next steward of the family legacy, the next generation's leader, but he was awkward, uncertain, more interested in engineering than in social dominance. And then there was the broader generational shift. The children who had grown up in houses like the Breakers were beginning to rebel against the very system that had raised them. Some married for love instead of strategy. Some rejected the formality and rigidity of their parents' world. Some simply left, preferring smaller lives with more freedom to vast estates that felt like prisons. Alice had built the Breakers to create permanence, to anchor the family to something solid. But permanence, it turned out, could not compete with the desire for escape. The maintenance costs kept rising. The staff requirements kept expanding. The taxes, once negligible, were increasing as local governments began to see estates like the Breakers not as sources of pride, but as sources of revenue. And then came the ultimate betrayal. Relevance itself began to fade. Newport was still fashionable, but the world was changing faster than the families who summered there could adapt. The automobile made travel easier, which meant the wealthy could scatter to new playgrounds instead of concentrating in a single location. The First World War disrupted European trade and made conspicuous consumption feel less celebratory and more grotesque. By the 1920s, the Breakers was still magnificent, still meticulously maintained, but it was also beginning to feel like a relic. The parties were smaller, the guest lists were shorter. The energy that had once filled the grand hall with laughter and music was quieter now, more subdued, as if everyone could feel that something essential had shifted. Alice Vanderbilt died in 1934 at the age of 89. She had lived long enough to see her husband's death. the construction of the monument meant to transcend it, and the slow realization that transcendence was not something marble could deliver. Her children inherited the breakers, and with it, they inherited an impossible question. What do you do with a palace built for a world that no longer exists? Cornelius III tried to maintain it. He spent summers there, honored the traditions, kept the staff employed, but the cost was crushing. The annual maintenance budget exceeded $100,000 at a time when the average American family lived on less than $2,000 a year. The house was eating money faster than the family could justify spending it. And with each passing year, the question became more urgent. Why? Why maintain 70 rooms for a family that barely used half of them? Why employ dozens of servants to preserve a lifestyle that felt increasingly absurd in a nation still recovering from economic depression? The answer, increasingly, was that there was no good reason, only obligation. Only the fear that letting go would mean admitting that everything the previous generation had built was hollow, temporary, a monument to nothing more than the ability to spend money faster than it could be counted. But obligation is not enough to sustain a palace, and fear is not a foundation. In 1948, the family made a decision. They could not maintain the breakers. They could not justify the expense. They could not pretend that this house, built to prove permanence, was anything other than an unsustainable burden. So they gave it away. The Preservation Society of Newport County took ownership, transforming the breakers from a private residence into a public museum. The rooms that had once been closed to all but the most elite guests were opened to anyone willing to pay the admission price. The servants were dismissed, the family retreated, and the breakers, frozen in time, became something it was never meant to be. A monument to a world that had destroyed itself under the weight of its own ambition. Today, the breakers stands exactly as it did in 1895. The marble gleams. The gold leaf catches the light. The frescoes on the ceiling still depict gods and myths, frozen in paint, untouched by the passage of more than a century. But the people are gone. Tourists walk through rooms that were designed to make guests feel small and unworthy. They take photographs of chandeliers that once illuminated dinners no one genuinely enjoyed. They stand in the grand hall and try to imagine what it was like to live in a house that required 70 people to maintain for 7 weeks of use each year. Most cannot. The scale is too vast. The expense too incomprehensible. The emotional reality too distant. But if you walk slowly, if you pay attention, you can still see the cracks in the illusion. The bedrooms are smaller than you expect. The private quarters feel almost claustrophobic compared to the public spaces. The family lived in rooms designed for function, not grandeur, while the grandeur was reserved for strangers, for guests, for the performance of wealth that never stopped demanding more. You can see it in the layout, the separation between where life was lived and where life was displayed. The servants' staircases, still visible, still narrow and steep and hidden. The locked doors that once kept children away from their parents' private grief. The breakers was never a home, it was a statement, and statements, no matter how loudly they are made, cannot fill the silence left by absence. Alice Vanderbilt wanted to build something that would outlast her pain. She succeeded. The breakers has survived fires, economic collapse, wars, and the slow erosion of the world that created it. But survival is not the same as triumph. The house stands, but the family scattered. The beauty remains, but the people who were supposed to inherit it chose smaller lives, quieter lives, lives where intimacy was possible and control was not the price of safety. Consuelo Vanderbilt, Alice's granddaughter through marriage, wrote in her memoirs about the suffocating formality of houses like the Breakers. She described childhoods governed by rules, affection rationed, freedom traded for the appearance of perfection. She described growing up surrounded by treasures and feeling impoverished in every way that mattered, and she was not alone. The children of the Gilded Age, raised in palaces, often fled them the moment they had the power to choose. They married outside their class. They rejected the social games their parents had played. They dismantled the very system that had built the houses they inherited. The Breakers, in the end, became a museum not because it was beloved, but because no one wanted to live there. That is the legacy. Not the marble, not the gold, not the fireplaces or the ocean views or the Italian craftsmen who spent years creating beauty that would outlast everyone who commissioned it. The legacy is this: grief cannot be outbuilt. Loss cannot be transformed into permanence through scale or expense or the sheer force of will. And the things we construct to protect ourselves from pain often become the very structures that isolate us from the possibility of healing. Alice Vanderbilt built the Breakers to prove survival, and she did survive. But survival in a palace is still survival alone, surrounded by beauty that reflects nothing back, by rooms that echo with the absence of the intimacy she sacrificed to maintain control. Today, more than 500,000 people visit the Breakers every year. They walk through the music room, the grand hall, the bedrooms where children once slept under the supervision of strangers. They marvel at the craftsmanship. They take photographs. They leave. And the house remains exactly as it was, because that is what museums do. They preserve. They freeze. They turn lived experience into curated display. But preservation is not life. And monuments, no matter how grand, are still just stone and gold, and the echoes of choices made by people who believed that permanence was worth any price. The Breakers tells us what that price was. It tells us in every locked door, every servant staircase, every room designed to impress instead of comfort. It tells us in the distance between the public halls and the private quarters, in the gap between what was displayed and what was hidden. It tells us that the things we build to escape pain often become the most accurate maps of that pain, preserved in marble, visible to anyone willing to look closely enough. And it asks us, quietly, persistently, what we are building now. What monuments are rising in our own time, constructed to silence grief, or prove worth, or create the illusion of control in a world that refuses to be controlled? The answer is everywhere, if we are willing to see it. In the houses too large for the families who live in them. In the careers built to prove something to people who are gone. In the carefully curated lives displayed on screens, designed to project success while hiding the loneliness that success often costs. The Breakers is not a relic, it is a mirror, and what it reflects is the same truth it embodied more than a century ago, that grandeur and grief are not opposites, but companions, that the most spectacular structures are often built on foundations of loss, and that the distance between what we show the world and what we feel inside is the true measure of what we sacrifice for permanence. Alice Vanderbilt got her monument. It has survived. But survival is cold comfort when the people you built it for are gone, when the world that celebrated it has moved on, when the only thing left is beauty that no one lives inside anymore. The Breakers endures. But endurance, in the end, is not the same as victory. It is simply what remains when everything else has been lost. The Breakers is only one story among many. Across America and Europe, estates like this one still stand, each carrying its own version of triumph and tragedy, ambition and loss. Some were built for love, others for power. Many, like the Breakers, were built to silence something too painful to speak aloud. If you found this story compelling, let me know in the comments which estate you want explored next. And if you believe these stories are worth preserving, consider subscribing. History is not just what happened. It is what we choose to remember and why. Thank you for watching.